Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you're all here today. Please make sure as you come in that you put where you're coming from and what your name is, and so we can greet you. We are here today with Carrie Reedy. She is a nutritionist that works with Lipedema Simplified, and she is here today to um, to let you know, hey, have you started keto? Now what? What are we going to do? So I am going to turn the show over to Carrie, but please make sure, audience members, hi, Cynthia, Cindy from Patterson, Calif- Patterson, California, CA. Um, and hello, Cheryl from Ontario, Canada. It's good to see you here too. Thank you guys so much for letting us see your beautiful names. Zelda's here from Nova Scotia. Hi, Zelda. And by the way, Zelda, thank you for your letter you wrote to me. Um, and I just want you guys to know we are thoroughly excited to have Carrie Reedy here. I'm going to step off. And I'll be in the background and I'm going to give the show over to Carrie. So, Carrie, you are up.
Oh, good. That means I'm in charge. This could be scary for everyone. It's great to have you all with us. We're going to try and make the best use of the time that we have today and really delve into a little bit about, once you've got started keto, what do you need to keep thinking about, how to make this something that's sustainable. So, Gail, if you just want to sort of jump into the slides. Oh, wow, I can see people from all over. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from Australia. So I'm coming to you from Monday, but it's great to be with you. And I'm a member of the coaching collaborative with Lipedema Simplified. And I do have the next slide. Let me just sort of click through. Oops. Oh, something weird's just happened. My little face is just in the middle there. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm Carrie Reedy. I am a university qualified nutritionist. I live a low carb lifestyle myself. I'm very much looking at our health and our well-being from a holistic perspective. So my training's fairly similar to those in the US that would be looking for an integrative doctor or a functional doctor, or maybe a naturopathic doctor. And, the great thing about what we understand about lipedema, I've been working with the Lipedema Simplified community for, I don't know, 18 months, maybe even longer now. I've worked with lots of ladies with lipedema that, come to me with the same sorts of questions that I'm sure many of you have. So let's get started. The reason that we're going to be talking today about keto is that we really feel strongly that keto is a great intervention to help support lipedema. Now, let me explain why. And there's a whole list of things here, but just to take you back a step, there's lots of different dietary interventions that we can use to help try and modulate someone's health concerns. When you start looking at all of those different options, we have to start somewhere. And we feel like keto is a great first place to start. If you haven't made a whole lot of dietary changes before, you might want to slowly work your way towards this. But what we see when someone moves towards a ketogenic way of eating is that they have more energy. The cravings for various different foods, particularly sugar and highly palatable junk type foods, they really lessen, and they sort of, not for everyone, but they sort of fade down to the point that you can manage them rather than it feeling like those cravings are controlling or managing you. We're able to ditch that diet mindset. Now, many ladies I talk to with lipedema will tell me that they started dieting in their teens and have pretty much spent a vast majority of their lives dieting. And this is such a challenging cycle to be in because it sort of really plays with our heads. Everything that, even the quality of our day will be determined by what happens on the scales. And we really feel like, by moving to more of a ketogenic way of eating, we can move beyond that diet mindset and we can start enjoying food again. We can enjoy the pleasure of great tasting food without feeling like all of those restrictions are kind of pushing in on us. Certainly some of the most important benefits for lipedema and for lymphedema is we have less inflammation, less pain, less swelling. And I think all of these things combined lead to a greater sense of a well-being, greater sense of hope for the future, because it won't feel like this is controlling us quite so much. And the reasons that a lower carbohydrate diet helps is that by taking down the level of carbohydrate intake, we do improve inflammation in the body. We do have more control over regulating those hormones, in particular insulin, but I do find that it has some really nice benefits across all of the different hormones in the body. You know, by regulating insulin, we get better blood sugar control. Now, many people come to me with lipedema and tell me, I don't have any issues with blood sugar. And for about 50% of the people that I see, that's absolutely true, that they don't have any overt signs in pathology that they have some blood sugar dysregulation. Probably the other 50% either are aware that there's some blood sugar issues, but haven't been addressing it from a dietary point of view, or they don't even know. And when we start delving into their pathology, we can start to see lots of signs and clues that there is some blood sugar dysregulation happening in the background. Certainly by lowering our carbohydrate intake, we tend to focus on other components of food more, one of those being including more healthy fats into the diet, and that tends to have a really nice benefit in terms of lymphatic flow as well, which is really beneficial for us. Now, I have to say, getting started can be tricky. And if anyone wants to put in the comments about their experience with either getting started or where they're feeling like they are in terms of this journey, this path here is a journey. And many of us start this journey eating what we call a standard American or a standard Western diet. It's actually abbreviated to the SAD diet, which kind of, gives an understanding of how we feel about this, because typically when we're eating a standard Western diet, we're eating a lot of highly processed foods, highly palatable foods, and these can play a really significant role in many of the health challenges that people experience. So often from there, people will move to more of a whole foods diet. This is where we're focusing more on eating real foods, whole foods, rather than the processed and packaged foods that are so abundant in our food supply. From there, people may think, well, I'm going to lower my carbohydrates, and we move to that. Some have dabbled in keto. Now, let me just explain. Low carb eating and ketogenic eating, we tend to use the terms interchangeably, but they're actually not interchangeable. Anything where a person's eating under, it depends on who you're listening to, but either under 100 grams of carbohydrates, that would be considered to be low carbohydrate eating, because a standard diet would include 200 to 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. So just by moving to a lower carbohydrate way of eating, you're dramatically lowering that level of carbohydrates in your diet. Once we start moving to testing out a ketogenic diet, we're looking at, again, depends on the person that you're listening to, but potentially less than 20 grams of carbohydrates a day. And that will sort of vary between people. But as you can see, this is a bit of a pathway. And the reason I explain it as a pathway or as a journey is that we sort of have to move through these different experiences. It's really hard to jump straight from a Western diet to keto. And sometimes we need to kind of maneuver our way there kind of gently, and then we need to test it out. But for those of you that have already started on a ketogenic diet, you'll know that staying on the path can be tricky too. And the reason for this is that it's a fairly convoluted path. Everyone's pathway is unique, and that makes it a little bit challenging. So what we're going to be talking about today is some of the things that we need to consider about staying on the path, some of the things that we need to keep thinking about wherever we are on this journey. So in terms of some of the challenges that I hear regularly from clients that are embarking on a ketogenic diet is that their main focus is on weight loss. And absolutely, I understand women coming to me with lipedema. I understand why their number one goal is to try and change some of that body composition, the weight concern. But it's really important to understand that weight loss isn't linear, and this can be a real challenge when we're starting something like a ketogenic diet, we have all of these, dreams and hopes and wishes for what this new intervention is going to do for us. And yet what we often experience in the first few weeks is quite for many women, there's quite a jump in terms of weight loss. It could be, 6, 7, 8 pounds of water weight that they're losing in the first few weeks. And then it just plateaus out. And so this little graph in this picture here kind of just explains that weight loss is not a linear process, especially when it comes to embarking on a ketogenic diet. There may be this initial loss, and then there may be a couple of weeks where the body just kind of, plateaus out. And I consider this to be that the body needs to get some underlying functions kind of up and running. It needs to focus on re-nourishing ourselves. For many women that have had a lifetime of dieting, there's potentially some nutritional deficiencies in there, and the body's just saying, hey, give me all this stuff, and it just wants to hold on to it. And my suggestion here is, if you've started keto and you're feeling like you're not getting that really rapid weight loss that you're hoping for, is please just to be patient. Has anyone experienced this? I'm going to try and have a little bit of a look through the comments. If you wanted to put any comments in about your experience with keto, we're going to have a bit of a question and answer time at the end. So feel free to put questions in the chat here about things that I'm saying, if you want to clarify anything, and we can kind of come back around to it a little bit later if you like. So need to be patient. That's hard, isn't it? It's hard to be patient when we have goals that we want to achieve. The second challenge I find people come to me when they're embarking on a ketogenic diet is the fact that we don't tend to consider ourselves to be unique. And this is because we are biochemically individual. There's a lot of different factors that make us up. And, genetics is a key piece to this, that we all have different genetic inputs into us. So the way that we metabolize fats, the way that we metabolize carbohydrates, the way that our genetics has potentially impacted some underlying health conditions, these are all going to be unique for us. The state of health of which we start this journey, again, is going to be unique for us. People with, thyroid issues or pre-existing metabolic conditions, it's going to be a different journey than maybe for somebody else. The environment that we live in is unique to us. And when I talk about that environment, it could be the environment that contributes to how well we sleep, what our stress load is like, what opportunities we have to eat good food, not good food. There's lots of different factors in here. And that environment also involves the air we breathe, the state of the house that we live in. All of these factors contribute to it. And whilst I've already mentioned stress, I'm putting stress in its own category, because we know that stress regulates and impacts things like cortisol. Cortisol then impacts blood sugar regulation. And when we're stressed, it's really hard to lose weight. So just before I go on to the next slide, I've had a couple of comments come in here. Tracy said, I lost 5 to 6 pounds, I'm assuming, in the first week, then stuck. Yeah, this is actually really common, but we don't tend to get told this. And so it can be really frustrating, because we think, well, I'm doing everything that I'm being encouraged to do, and yet I'm not getting sort of those, losses every single week. I would say just be patient. Some of the things that we're going to be talking about today certainly are going to be helpful in terms of other things that need to be considered. Nicole is saying, do you recommend a particular multivitamin? If you don't mind, Nicole, I'll come back around to that one at the end. Joanne's saying she's done keto and loved it. I think my problem started when I tried to incorporate keto-friendly foods. Yeah, there's if you're talking about keto-friendly foods being keto-friendly foods in packaging, that can certainly make a difference. And the other thing for us to remember is, just because something is keto-friendly doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for us. Now, eggs are a key part of a ketogenic diet, as is dairy, and these are inflammatory foods for some people. They actually are in the top list of allergen foods. So sometimes we need to play around with including them, not including them for periods of time, and see whether that makes a difference. Joanne's also saying that 20 grams of net carbs is very different to 20 grams of total carbs. Absolutely. And we can talk about that as well. And I think this is where this bio-individual piece is really important for us to consider, because some people can probably get away with net carbs under 20 grams. Net carbs means the total carbs less the fiber in the food. Other people do need to consider just under 20 grams of gross carbs or total carbs, which is going to be quite a significant difference in terms of what we're eating. And we can certainly talk about that as well. Megan's just saying, share the names of some good size trials to show that keto works. Unfortunately, if you're thinking about keto in terms of lipedema, that research is really very much in its infancy. They're only small size trials. There are a lot more research papers into keto as a general intervention. But I always say, ultimately, it's about us. We could even look at a trial that looks at 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 people that across the board shows that there's benefit for a certain intervention, a certain way of eating. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be right for us. No trial shows that anything is 100% effective for 100% of people. And these factors on this slide here really are the things that determine whether it's going to be working for us or against us. And so, Megan, I think this is a great question. Are there benefits of keto over low carb? The only way to know that is ultimately going to be testing it out, seeing how our particular body responds to keto. And then, what I often say to people is, once you're kind of in a good routine of keto, then start testing little bits out and just seeing how your body copes. Because if, for instance, you're trying to eat less than 20 grams of total carbs a day, you may then want to test it out and say, well, how does my body respond at 25 or 30 or 35 or 40? And just see. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later, about finding your own barometer. And I'll come back around to your question then. Someone, Anais, is asking about cholesterol. We might leave some of these questions to the end, actually, because cholesterol is a really interesting topic to talk about. Megan was saying she feels better eating low carbs, struggles to stay under 20 grams of carbs every single day. Yeah, and it can be tricky. And that's why, Megan, I've said we want to test this out. See how we go. You may find that under 25 or under 30 grams of carbs is fine. You may even find under 50 grams of carbs are fine for you personally. The challenge is, as a nutritionist and sitting on the other side of the desk, for instance, to somebody, I can't tell a person how their body is going to respond, because there's so many factors that are outside our control. So it certainly is something worth playing around with. Mary's asking if keto is okay after gastric bypass surgery. Again, it needs a little bit more support in terms of getting it right. Usually after gastric surgery, there's a lesser capacity for intake. So we need to make sure absolutely that whatever that intake is really nutrient dense. So you're getting as much beneficial nutrition out of the food that you're eating. So this kind of I guess plays into some of these questions we've had. And that's, I often like to say to people, online, we'll find that keto's promoted as being a one-size-fits-all approach. And we all know, let's face it, we all know that there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all. We've all bought that particular piece of clothing or a particular item for our house that says one-size-fits-all, and we've found that it doesn't necessarily work. And I would say keto is kind of like this as well. There is actually no one size fits all. Like I've just been discussing with Megan, we do need to personalize this for us and for our own circumstances. And so, Cheryl's just put a question in the chat. She doesn't eat meat. Legumes are very high in protein and fiber, but they're also high in carbs, and she doesn't want to eat tofu every day. So I guess my question, Cheryl, and something to be thinking about is, if you don't eat meat, do you eat eggs and do you include dairy? So if you're including those, I totally understand you don't necessarily want to be eating soy and tofu every day, but are there some other options that you do find that you can eat? And, we can talk about that. Of course, there's some protein powder options. They're not my number one choice. I really do like people to eat real food, but certainly bringing in a protein smoothie in there, we're using a plant-based protein, would be a way to kind of maneuver around that a little bit. So yeah, eggs, as long as you tolerate them, are a real darling in terms of the ketogenic way of eating. So, that means that you can certainly bring some variety in there, but I would be thinking about maybe some of those protein powders and subbing out some of those meals for a protein smoothie might be a way of kind of getting around some of that, because we do need protein, and we find that the protein crowds out the desire for some of these other things as well. So the challenge, there are many challenges in terms of sticking with keto, starting keto. But one of the things I find that I hear over and over and over, and I alluded to this before, is that many of us have spent a vast majority of our lives dieting. And when we've done that, it sort of sets our body up and our metabolism up to sort of fight against our weight loss efforts. And this sort of plays into just thinking, was it, somebody said, Tracy said that she's lost some weight in the first little instance. And this is common. And I think that sometimes this is where the body kind of gets involved. It's like, oh, I need to hang on to everything. And it takes a little bit more time for our body to get into the groove of just using some of those fats that we're eating in the diet for energy. It takes time to kind of become adapted to a ketogenic way of eating, and it takes time to get our body into sync in terms of what we're doing. And this is often because of all of the dieting we've done in the past. The body's desperately trying to defend any weight loss, which is really challenging, I know, but it is just a fact of life. The more that we have intervened in the past, the more tricky it is to get going with these sorts of things. Getting into ketosis can happen fairly quickly, usually within sort of the first 3, 4, 5 days of someone embarking on a ketogenic diet where they're keeping that carbohydrate intake really low. Our body naturally moves into a ketogenic state. Becoming fat adapted is totally different. They're kind of heading in the same direction, but becoming fat adapted is really more, we refer to that as being when the body's actually fully adapted to working in a ketogenic way. And the way to explain this is that typically when we come from a standard, Western diet, our bodies use glucose as energy, and they're very well adapted to using glucose as energy. But we're now asking our bodies to use the fat, either fat in our diet or fat that's stored away somewhere in us, as its prime fuel source. And so we can move into a ketogenic state fairly quickly, but it can take, for some people, this is a fairly quick process. It just takes a couple of weeks, but for some, it can take a number of months until our body becomes fully fat adapted and really comfortable in and sort of on the same page, if you like, in terms of using either our body fat or the fat in our diet to fuel us. So we need to be mindful that one of these happens fairly quickly, one of them takes a little bit longer. When you first embark on a ketogenic diet, you can use the urine test strips to test and see whether you're in ketosis, but these are really only effective up until you become fat adapted. Once you become fat adapted, the body is using the particular ketones that we test on a ketone urine test strip. And what you'll find is that no longer do they show that you're in ketosis, but that doesn't mean that you're not in ketosis. So just be mindful that those urine test strips are really good just in the first few weeks. The gold sort of standard for testing whether you're in ketosis is using one of the I'm just grabbing it out, one of the blood sugar monitors, but using ketone test strips. Now, they are expensive, far more expensive than the glucose test strips. But if you really want to know, testing in your blood is going to be the most effective way of knowing whether you are maintaining that state of ketosis. Patience. I'm not one that has a lot of patience, but I think really, as we've talked about some of these challenges in terms of getting into ketosis, staying in ketosis, it's probably the number one word that I would need to encourage you to consider and to really hold on to, that we do need to be patient in terms of allowing our body to kind of get into the groove in what we're trying to do with this. Now, I've got some great questions in the chat. We certainly are going to come around to those. I'll just move through the content of this so that I can sort of delve more deeply into some of those questions. This is often a question that people ask me. They say, how do we know when we need to start tweaking things? And how do we know whether we are stalled or plateaued in our weight loss goals because of food choices or other factors? And I guess this answers some of the questions that we've already been asked in there. But how do we need to know when we need to start tweaking things? I guess if someone's sitting at a plateau for, I would say, months, I'm not saying weeks. Weeks of plateau are actually quite normal. Like that picture I showed you before, weight loss is not linear. Many of us have been conditioned to think weight loss is linear when we've been using the, uh, calories in, calories out kind of method. We're given a food plan, we have a calorie deficit, and we expect to lose, it might be a pound a week or 2 pounds a week, depending on the particular regime. We know for us with lipedema that that often isn't the case, that even though other people following the same food plan are losing weight, we don't particularly have the same experience with that. But what we do find is that certainly using a ketogenic diet, there are plateaus. There's, you may find that you'll go weeks and weeks with, just toggling around, half a pound up and down, and then you might hop on the scales and you'll have dropped a couple of pounds in a week that you haven't done anything different. This is kind of what the trajectory does look like. If that goes on for longer than, a month or two, then it is time to really start considering what's going on here. What other factors may be involved in this? And one of our coaches shared this graph a couple of weeks ago. This is her lipedema weight loss story. So she started just after Christmas to get really back into super focused on what she was eating. What you'll notice is these 3 peaks here where she has the blue circles around them. These are when she ate dairy. She suspected before she even jumped back into fully engaging with a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet that maybe dairy wasn't her friend. But this one here, I think she said, was a family birthday. She had a keto cheesecake, and then she was away on holidays, and she had some other things. And what you'll notice for her is that when she eats something like dairy, because her body is intolerant to it, she may put on a couple of kilos overnight. Slowly, it kind of comes back off again. But if you're sort of tracking things, and I'm not a massive advocate of tracking all of the time, because I think we can become really tunneled vision about that tracking. And I've seen people will tell me that, just by jumping on the scales, it can ruin their whole day. So I'm sure some of you can relate to that, but we do want to be mindful. But if you're concerned that maybe things aren't progressing in the way that you would like, it can be helpful to track for short bursts of time. And then you may start to notice things like this, that certain foods are contributing to weight gain or plateaus, and that you may find that when you take some of those foods or those suspected foods out of your diet, that you may start to see some weight changing. If you're eating a food that you're intolerant to, it's creating inflammation in the body. And I think about that in terms of, if we're inflamed, that's like fire in the body. What do you think the body would do if there's fire? It kind of wants to tone it down. So it kind of holds on to a lot of water to tone down and dilute down some of that inflammation. And so typically what we can see in this graph here is this was inflammatory water weight, because very quickly in each of these instances, well, I don't know about this last one, but each of these instances, that weight dropped off fairly quickly afterwards as well, suggesting that it is food and intolerance and inflammation, because it then kind of fairly quickly came back to baseline. Some of the other factors that can contribute to stalls or weight loss plateaus is both carb creep and fat creep. Now, what I mean by that is, when we first embark on trying something out like keto, we tend to be fairly structured about how we're going about it. We tend to do things like meal planning. We're really focusing. We might be tracking on a piece of paper or some other way, or we're following some particular guide or list of foods to be including in our diet. What we find is, over time, we get a little bit more casual, like, oh, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And I am speaking from personal experience here, that, we get out of that habit of focusing on what we're eating and become a little bit more casual. And then we find that things like our carbohydrate intake is slowly increasing. It's like, oh, another piece of cheese here. Oh, another piece of salami here. Another this, another that. Oh, I'm grabbing a handful of nuts. Oh, a second handful of nuts. This is where we can find that we slowly slip out of ketosis and sit back more into that low carb way of eating, or maybe even back into that standard Western way of eating by having more processed foods, highly palatable foods, without us even realizing. Here where I live in Australia, we have lots of options for things like keto bars, keto ice cream, low carb or keto wraps, all sorts of things. Again, they're in packages, they're highly palatable, and we tend to kind of get to the point where we overeat them if we're not really focusing on what we're eating. So certainly it's very easy for that to happen with carbs. And whilst we don't tend to talk about fat creep so much, it is important for us to acknowledge that whilst we don't want to consider the calories in, calories out deal anymore, because we know for lipedema in particular, it's not very helpful, but we can end up eating more fat than we need. And per gram of fat, there's a lot more calories than there are in other foods. And so what we can find is when we get a bit casual in this and we're like, oh, well, I'll just throw a little bit of this in and a little bit of that in, all of a sudden that fat in the diet gets more and more and more and more. And let's face it, it's tasty. We all get excited about having something like some streaky bacon. It tastes really good, but we can eat more than we need. And so, these are some things that we would obviously start to be thinking about in terms of, are we no longer in ketosis because of that carb creep, or are we no longer having the benefits from a keto diet because we've actually got to the point where we're just putting so much energy into our body through high fat foods that our body's just using up the fat there rather than coming in and taking some fat from places elsewhere in our body that we don't necessarily want them. So, many advocates of keto online will be like, fat's an unlimited food. But I don't see fat as being an unlimited food. We certainly need to be eating fat in our diet. The low fat experience or experiment of the 80s and 90s has certainly played some havoc with our health. We need to be eating fat for our brain, for all of the cell membranes around our body. These things are super important, but we need to modulate it. We don't want to just be eating it for the sake of eating it and causing us some challenges along the way. Now, some other things that we do need to consider, whether there is that underlying metabolic dysregulation that we've spoken about. We tend to think about that in terms of the blood sugar dysregulation, but metabolic dysregulation impacts all of our hormones. So it impacts our thyroid. Thyroid controls metabolism in the body. And what I found, could you try again? Oh, Siri just decided it wanted to answer the question. Sorry about that. Maybe it knows I talk a lot about thyroid and Siri got excited. Anyway, I always like my ladies with lipedema to get a full thyroid panel taken, because I think it's really important that we understand the state of our thyroid. And then I also usually with them do a little bit more of a thyroid questionnaire. What I often see is people that come back with normal-ish thyroid results that their doctor said, no, nothing to see here. Your thyroid's perfectly fine. But when we start to look at symptoms, it's every symptom, tick, 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 tick. And what we need to understand is when our thyroid is being tested on pathology, they're looking at the hormones and they're looking at the state of the thyroid gland up here. But just because we make the thyroid hormones doesn't mean that our cells are receiving them. If someone has a really vast array of thyroid symptoms, yet I'm not sure I understand. Sorry about that. If someone has a very vast array of thyroid symptoms and yet their thyroid results look normal, it may be that they have what we call sort of cellular hypothyroidism or thyroid hormone resistance. Just like we can become insulin resistant, I think we have a situation very commonly that we can become thyroid hormone resistant, or that our cells just aren't receiving those thyroid hormones, and therefore we're getting a lot of thyroid symptoms without necessarily our pathology looking out of balance. So these are certainly things that we want to consider as well, because we could be doing all the right things in terms of the food that we're eating, but if there's some of these underlying dysregulations, then we need to be addressing these at the same sort of time. Something that's really common, and many of you are going to think to yourself, oh no, it's not that I'm eating too little, but I find this very, very commonly with my clients, that when we start, doing a bit of an inventory of what they eat on any given day, I think this comes back to that diet hamster wheel that many of us have been on, but it's actually quite common to not be eating enough, and certainly not enough in terms of protein. We need to be eating that protein for healing and repair, to get all those amino acids we need for good enzymes in the body, for good levels of neurotransmitters. And so it's certainly possible that we're not eating enough, and that is contributing to weight loss stalls or weight loss plateaus. So we do want to be doing all that we can to make sure that we're eating sufficient for our body's needs, so that our body doesn't slow down our metabolism, because this is what happens. If we're not eating enough, our body will slow down our metabolism to match our food intake. And then if we're only eating a little bit and our metabolism is matching that, we're not filling our needs for protein and for all of the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients we potentially need from our diet. So not eating enough can be an issue, but also so too can eating too frequently. And so I guess this is, two sides of the coin. We really need to think about what's going on in terms of our eating patterns. We were very much led to believe, again, in the 80s and 90s, that we could graze all day. Grazing was great for our blood sugar. Grazing was great for us. Yet for our digestive system, we actually do need to be eat a meal, have a nice break, eat another meal, have a break, rather than eat all day. And so sometimes it's about just fasting between meals. Sometimes it's about bringing in some other fasting practices to just try and kind of get things moving again in terms of these weight loss stalls. Things like time restricted eating, where people are having a larger window where they don't eat during the day and a smaller window where they do eat. This is things like that 16 and 8. Some people like alternate day fasting, things more like the 5 and 2 way of doing it. But there's lots of different fasting practices, and it's about working out whether fasting is the right next step for you, or whether actually eating more is the right next step for you. And I know this may seem very sort of counter, that we're talking about two things that are quite different, but it really is important that we consider all of these factors if we're not getting all of the benefits out of our ketogenic diet that we would like. Now, one of those factors I mentioned earlier about is stress can really impact our weight loss goals. And it could be stress about our new way of eating. It could be life stress. I think the last few years, in terms of the COVID pandemic and economic challenges that are coming along now, can certainly be a stress for many people. And it's really important for us to consider that we can be eating a great diet. We can be moving our bodies and doing all of the other conservative things that we're encouraged to do, using a vibration plate or going to the pool, wearing our compression, doing all of these things. But if stress is a huge piece of what's going on in your life, you still may not get all of the benefits from the things that you're doing until you start managing and trying to regulate some of those stress responses in the body. Now, whether you're new to keto or you're well along your journey, I think it's really important that we do stop and take time to pause from time to time, regroup, and work out our next move. Many of these factors that I've mentioned to you that can be challenges in terms of weight loss stalls are really things that kind of just slip in without us noticing. And that's why I say it's really helpful from time to time to sort of take a bit of a pause and regroup. And I'm really a big advocate of assessing, as you can see, not just one assess, but assess. What we want to be thinking about on an ongoing basis is, what's going on for me right now? What's happening with my symptoms? Am I feeling better? Am I feeling worse? I always like people to approach an intervention such as a ketogenic diet with a state of curiosity, thinking about, how is my body responding? What is changing in my body? If things aren't quite going to plan, then stop, pause, assess, think about what could be happening. Am I swapping out a meal for a keto bar in the middle of the day because I'm so busy at work. What could I do differently? Where could I bring in some batch cooking on the weekend? What other options are there? How can I simplify what I'm doing to make it work for me? And we do want to be taking this assess approach on a regular basis. And this last point down the bottom, and I think this goes back to the comment I made, I think it was for Megan. We want to find our personal barometer. What is happening in our body when we're in ketosis versus when we're not in ketosis anymore? I have one client, and this is kind of bizarre to me, but she gets a real aching elbow. So can you see my elbow? She says, I wake up in the morning and my elbow, the arthritis in my elbow has flared overnight. And she says she uses this as her personal barometer to stop, reflect, think about what she was doing the previous 24 hours. Was it a certain activity she did, or was there a food that she'd incorporated in that day that maybe her body wasn't responding so favorably to? For many of us with lipedema, it's the pain that we experience. We get pain in our joints, we get pain in our limbs, and that's our measure to know when we've gone over our particular body's personal threshold for carbohydrates. Joanne's just put in the comments, my hips hurt when I eat too many carbs. Yeah, some people find that their fingers, they wake up in the morning and they just feel, all of them feels more swollen. It's about finding what actually is our barometer. And then this is the way that I encourage people later on, once they're well established in a ketogenic diet, and say that they've been focusing on keeping their carbs less than 20 for a number of months. Then I might say to them, let's test out 25 or 30 grams of carbohydrates, and you watch and see what happens with your personal barometer, so that you know whether this is too much for you or whether you can certainly tolerate more. Ultimately, as a nutritionist, my ideal would be that people can eat the broadest possible diet that works for them to get symptom relief. And whether you start testing out more carbohydrates by bringing in more fruits like berries, bringing in a little bit more quantity, or whether you've just desperately missed vegetables and you want to incorporate more, this is where I talk to people about playing around with these things and just testing it out and seeing what your particular barometer is, so that you know what you can use as your measure and start playing around with these things. Now, I'm one of the coaches here at Lipedema Simplified, so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about how we as coaches can support you. We actually have two different ways that coaches can help support people as they navigate this tricky pathway of keto. And one of those is individual coaching sessions. And for more information about this, you can go to Lipedema Simplified's website. We have coaches for talking about things like compression, pain management, all of those other conservative kind of practices, and we have nutritionists. We also, new for this year, have what we call small group coaching, and we're particularly using this in terms of this nutritional intervention. This is where, rather than one-on-one coaching, which can work out a little bit expensive for some people, it's an opportunity to join together with a small group of other people that are going on the same journey as you, and working together with a nutritionist and the group to help get the results that you're looking for. And this is a way of still getting personalized recommendations based on your specific circumstances, but in a potentially a more cost-effective, more community kind of focused way. Now, as a nutritionist, I always like to share these slides with people. There is a lot online about keto, and it's very easy to think, I can just download something online, I can do keto myself. And that's absolutely true. There is a lot of resources available online. But what we focus on at Lipedema Simplified is eating the healthiest possible type of ketogenic diet that we can. These two pictures, what people think keto is and what keto really is, this is going to look different for each person based on that bio-individuality that I mentioned before. But we do want to focus on making it the most health-promoting way of eating that we possibly can. We want to find a way to move forward with this that's sustainable. And I provide my clients with a framework. These are the recommendations, and then we work it into your specific food likes and dislikes, your family's foods and likes and dislikes, how much time you have, how much time you like being in the kitchen, all of these factors. So we need to make it sustainable so you can do it long term. And then we certainly need to personalize it for us individually rather than just using any old plan. We want to make sure that it's one, specific for lipedema, and two, that it's specific for us. So our next small group coaching program starting in just over a week. That will be Sunday night in the US, but it will be Monday for those of us like myself that are down under. These will be small groups up to 6 people. Sorry, I'm just going to grab a glass of water. Hang on. Too much talking. So each of these small groups will include 3 hours of live coaching. So that's earlier in the week, and then later in the week we'll have some live question and answer sessions. These will all be recorded, so if you can't make them, you can certainly listen afterwards, but we would encourage you to come along live so that you can get the information and ask your questions. There'll also be a private Facebook group. That's for people that have already been in the coaching sessions and for people that are new to small group coaching, so that you can ask your questions and learn from each other. We as nutritionists feel like there is a real power in learning from each other. Someone else will ask a question that you didn't even think to ask, and it may answer some queries that you have. And you also have access to all of the recordings for 6 months after the session. So you can go back and revisit various different aspects of the ketogenic journey that you may think you need to refresh yourself on. Now, not only do you get 6 hours of support and access to this Facebook group, but you also get a whole lot of handouts, recipes, checklists, assessments along the way. And the price of our small group coaching is actually less than the price of 2 45-minute individual coaching sessions. So you get 6+ hours of support from a coach, plus all this additional information, and you get the information that you need because it's personalized to the needs of the group. And the price currently is $197 US to do this. And it's a really wonderful way to get started if you haven't started before, or if you're feeling like you just need that regroup, that refresh. It's also a wonderful time to sort of step into a group kind of program where you can get the support you need with whatever's going on specifically for you and get your program sort of moving forward. Now, we have a special bonus for March, and this comes back to that comment that I made earlier about stress being a huge piece in our metabolism, in weight loss efforts. And in addition to the 6 hours of one-on-one time that you're getting, or group coaching time, we're also adding in an extra hour presentation on the role that stress plays. And we're going to bring in some great stress busting techniques, because if we can start to modulate that stress response in our lives, this can really help us move forward in terms of our weight loss goals as well. And of course, there'll also be some question and answer time around these stress busting techniques and the challenges with stress as well. So that kind of gives you a little bit of information about our small group coaching. If you want more information about our general one-on-one coaching, you can go to Lipedema Simplified as well. Great news for anyone that's on the call that's part of our Lipedema Simplified tribe. You'll also be getting a discount code emailed out. Now, I'm not 100% sure what that discount code, but it is significant. So if you're feeling like you're sort of heading in the right direction, but maybe you need a little bit of extra help and support, then jumping into a group coaching session might be a great way to do that. Now, we have lots of questions here in the group. I'm just going to scroll right back to the beginning. Hope you don't mind, but I'll scroll back there so that we can answer any questions that are still outstanding. And these can be questions about keto, it can be about lipedema, or it can be about coaching. Now, Joanne, just because I can see you on the screen here, said you'll be out of town during this session. Will you let us know about the next one? Yes, there won't be another one in April because we have our special heart-to-heart in April. Joanne, depending on how much of the time you're going to be out of town, you may want to think about doing it sooner. Otherwise, we'll be looking at doing it. I guess that means it'll be sometime in May will be the next small group coaching cohort intake. So let me just scroll right back up to the front of these questions and just see what we haven't answered. So just going back to that original question from Nicole, do you recommend taking a multivitamin to help cover any nutrient gaps from keto? Really great question, Nicole. I find that if we are focusing on eating enough protein, we're getting some healthy fats in there, and we're incorporating some low starch or non-starchy vegetables into our diet, we won't necessarily have a whole lot of nutritional gaps. That said, people that come to this after a lifetime of other types of dietary interventions where maybe they've been restricting food intake or restricting other food groups, there may be some nutritional deficits. So I kind of see a multivitamin as a bit of an insurance policy. I myself take a multi-B. That way I know that I'm kind of covering some of those things. I also take a magnesium supplement. What else do I take? And I usually incorporate some sort of like greens type of powder somewhere in there because it's much lower in carbohydrate, but it covers a lot of those nutritional, I guess, gaps that you've mentioned. The one that I take contains a lot of a product called sulforaphane that comes from broccoli sprouts, because those greens that we eat upregulate a whole lot of defense processes in the body. So that's the reason that I do that. But some other people just like to use a greens drink that's got some of those nutrients in it. That's another way of covering, or at least making sure that you're covering any potential nutritional gaps in there. I hope that answers your question. If you want any more for clarification, if you can put that in the questions further along. Joanne said that, she mentioned about the difference between net carbs and total carbs. I work on total carbs initially when we're trying to get people into having a ketogenic experience. If you're looking at net carbs, you may find that your carbs are actually still too much and you may not be getting into a state of ketosis. We do want to test out how the body responds to true ketosis and just see what changes it makes in terms of energy, swelling, pain, these sorts of things. So that's the reason I encourage that gross carb consideration first. But ultimately, over time, like I've probably said over and over in this presentation, we need to be personalizing this to us. And rather than seeing it as a one size fits all, that everyone should be under 20 or everyone should be doing this or everyone should be doing that, it's about working out what works well for us. Yes. Oh, thanks for changing the slides. Okay. Megan, what I might do is take down your details and come back to you in terms of some clinical trials, because I think that's helpful. I don't have the names of those trials off the top of my head. Anais has asked about keto diet and cholesterol. Keto, when we move into a ketogenic diet, especially if we're losing weight, we do find that we're liberating a lot of stuff from those cells around our body, particularly those adipose cells, which are the ones that contain the stored fat in our body. We do often see a jump in cholesterol initially as we're losing weight. We do find that plateaus out after a while. It is something that needs to be considered, but I don't think it's as significant as we've been led to believe. And if you're in the Facebook group, I'm going to put some links in the Keto for Lipedema Facebook group about cholesterol, about why cholesterol can go up. Dave Feldman's actually doing a presentation at our upcoming Heart to Heart, and he's going to be talking a little bit about cholesterol. He's also just this weekend, I think, spoken at Low Carb Denver about cholesterol, but he's a really awesome research. So I'll put some links in that Keto for Lipedema Facebook group about keto and cholesterol so that you can have a look, and hopefully that will allay some of your concerns. Megan's mentioned that she's feeling better eating low carb but struggles to keep those carbs under 20. Megan, if you're feeling better, that goes back to that personal barometer that we spoke about, a few minutes ago. It may be that you could feel even better if you can get those carbs down, but some people need to work their way down, rather than just jumping from here to here, where it feels like there's such a big void, such a big leap to get there. Some people just need to go from wherever they were to low carb kind of get into a habit, get into some new food choices, get really comfortable with that, and then, lower a little bit more, and then lower a little bit more, and then embark on a ketogenic experiment or trial just to see how you in particular respond. So just see that as being an opportunity to recognize that you're feeling better, but keep that curiosity about, could you feel even more better? That didn't make sense. Could you feel better? Even better. And go from there. Mary asked about keto and gastric bypass surgery. Like I said, I think it's certainly doable, but it does need a little bit more support to make sure that you're not filling up with keto-friendly processed foods, but actually eating real food that isn't expanding out that gastric bypass surgery that you've already had, but that is giving you all of those nutrients, because it's very easy post-gastric bypass surgery to become deficient in some of those nutrients, particularly things like B12, some of the other minerals and vitamins. So we want to make sure that the foods that you are eating are really good, that you're getting the most benefit that you can from that. I think I answered your question, Cheryl, about not eating meat and trying to change it around. If you can eat eggs, then certainly that's an option, but you're going to want to have lots of variety in those eggs so that you're not feeling like you're just eating eggs every single day. What kind of foods sorry, let me read this question from Marsha. What kind of foods you can eat for lipedema? So certainly, what we've been talking about today, Marsha, is the benefits of a ketogenic diet, which is really focusing on eating healthy protein. So protein from all of your meat sources, dairy, eggs, fish, can be like protein powders, particularly those plant-based protein powders if you need to get some more protein in there, collagen. All of these are ways that you can incorporate those healthy proteins. We do want to be eating a lot of healthy fats, not too many, it's all a balance, but including those healthy fats in there. So don't need to eat the low-fat meat. You certainly can be including some meat there, some fat there, and playing around with the level of carbohydrates that come from those non-starchy vegetables. And we really want to be focusing on eating those real foods, so that because our body knows what to do with them. I think I answered your question, Mary, about the urine test strips, but also the best ones are the blood glucose monitor, and using a monitor that also tests for ketones, and using ketone strips to do that and see how your body's going, whether you are actually in a ketogenic state. Now, just something to say, the more ketosis doesn't necessarily mean the better. So don't feel like you need to chase higher numbers of ketosis. Either you are in ketosis or you're not. So it doesn't matter if it's just, mildly into ketosis. We just want to get to a state of ketosis. So Joanne's asked, does that mean that we need to be in ketosis for a long time? Does breaking ketosis mean you have to start again? Once fats are adapted, is it harder to fall out of ketosis? It's never hard to fall out of ketosis. You just need to eat something that's high in carbs, and your body will go back to using that glucose preferentially. I think our bodies are kind of designed to use glucose first when it's there, and therefore we will be out of a state of ketosis. If, Joanne, we find that ketosis really helps our lipedema symptoms in terms of that pain, swelling, energy, body composition, then it is something we do want to be getting into a routine of doing long term. And that's where we talk about we need to make it so it's sustainable, so that we can do it for long term. We do want to play around with it a little bit so that we can make it work for us specifically. Does that mean then that you can go in and out of ketosis? There are actually some people that talk about like carb cycling in terms of women's health. If someone's like still in their not premenopausal years, then there is some research that's saying we do want to have some more carbohydrates in the diet from time to time. People that have thyroid issues may find that they need to play around with those carbohydrates a little bit to get their thyroid humming. And when I talked before about carb cycling, some people advocate just eating ketosis during the week and eating normally on the weekends. That's because they're looking at it from a different lens to what we're looking at it for lipedema. We know that especially for lipedema, that those carbohydrates are getting stored in the body. They're kind of fueling the growth in those fat cells, in those adipose cells in the body, that potentially is triggering this inflammatory cycle. It's leading to the fibrosis, the hypoxia in the cells. We don't know exactly all the ins and outs in terms of what's driving this for lipedema, but we do find that for lipedema in particular, it's better to stay in ketosis rather than going in and out, in and out, in and out in terms of that carb cycling. But again, this is where some coaching is really helpful, because we can look at your specific circumstances and work out what's going to be best for you. The question about once fat adapted, is it harder to fall out of ketosis? I think I answered that when I said it's not hard to fall out of ketosis at all. It just takes a chocolate bar or a piece of pizza that have carbs in them, and boom, you're out of ketosis. But what it would mean is that your body's more adept at moving back into ketosis after, for instance, holidays or a birthday or something. If a person chose to eat something that's not specifically a ketogenic food, then it's, the body knows how to get back into ketosis quicker. And so you don't tend to have the same issues that you may have in the early days of adopting a ketogenic diet. JP says, where do we find keto diets for lipedema, or is it just a normal keto diet? Actually, we find that there are some nuances to doing a ketogenic diet for lipedema. And when we work with people, either through our small group coaching or through our one-on-one coaching, we certainly do provide dietary recommendations and guidelines. It is a little bit more nuanced, because this is a specific sort of condition that we're trying to manage. But anytime we test out keto, it's going to give us some information about our bodies. Marsha's saying that she has to be careful about salt intake when you have lipedema. Salt intake is really interesting. We've been told for a long time that if you have a lot of salt, it's going to contribute to lymphedema, so that edema, that swelling in our limbs. And we also know with ketogenic diets that we do need to be making sure we are getting enough salt in the diet, because we tend to get a bit of a fluid shift. Electrolytes are really important. Marsha, that's where it would be about personalizing this for you, making sure that you are getting a broad array of those electrolytes. Salt's just one of those electrolytes. That's just the sodium. We also need to be thinking about potassium and magnesium and other electrolytes to make sure that they stay nicely balanced, so that we can get as many benefits from this way of eating as we possibly can. But yes, that's certainly something that many, many people come to me and they say, I've been told I need to, keep salt out of my diet. But we do find that actually it can be helpful, especially when it's balanced with the other electrolytes. What we do find is if it's just salt on its own, that maybe it can contribute to some issues. There was some fascinating research presented last year about there being more imbalances in those electrolytes in and around those adipose cells in women with lipedema, in that lipedema tissue. So that may also be where you're coming from in terms of that salt, but we do need to keep those electrolytes nice and balanced. Kath's asked, what would thyroid symptoms be? There's a whole list. What I might do, again, is post some thyroid symptoms in the Facebook group so that you can go through that. But typically, it's things like cold extremities, so fingers, toes, very dry skin. I usually use myself as an example. We tend to lose the outer bits of our eyebrows. We tend to lose a lot more hair, so the hair can thin when our thyroid's not working optimally. But there's actually a whole list of things. So I'll post that in the Facebook group over the next day or so, just so that you can have a bit of a look through that and think about, is my thyroid working as well as I would like it to? And that's usually an impetus to start thinking about getting some additional testing done, or thinking about that cellular hyperthyroidism that I mentioned today, where you can actually have really normal thyroid results on pathology, but still you're experiencing a lot of thyroid symptoms. Because if you can start managing those, then you can try and get some of those systems back up and running. Marsha just mentioned that she's had her thyroid removed. So again, this is an interesting scenario. You would have had your thyroid removed either because of nodules or because of Graves' disease or something else. Now it's a matter of making sure that whatever medication you're taking is optimal for you, so that it's keeping that metabolism doing all the things that you want them to do. Joanne just mentioned in her comment about hips hurting, and that comes back to my comments about wanting that barometer to be that thing that we can assess and see whether maybe we've overdone the carbs, or maybe something else is going on. We've eaten a food that our body's reacting to. So Cynthia's talking about, oh, you're interested in joining our coaching program? Great, but you're deaf. Okay. I think, Cynthia, that's something we could work around. We don't have subtitles on our webinars, but I know that subtitles can be turned on in Zoom. So bear with me, Cynthia. I'm going to make a little note to myself, and we will reach out to you and let you know whether that's an option in terms of subtitles. And hopefully that would be enough to help. Now, I noticed that Gail, in her kindness, has just mentioned that I do offer one-on-one discovery sessions. These are complimentary 20-minute chats via Zoom that, as one of the coaches with Lipedema Simplified, that we offer. If some of the things that we've talked about today have piqued your curiosity and you're thinking, what's the next step for me? And you want to just run by that with someone, you're more than welcome to book in one of these quick 20-minute chats so that we can talk about what the right steps are for you. If you're curious about whether small group coaching will work for you, again, this is another option. Book one of these calls with me and we can have a bit more of a chat about it. Oh, Cynthia's just responded, the subtitles on this live are not great. It may be that the subtitles don't understand my Australian accent. I do apologize about that. Not sure that there's much that we can do about that. So just seeing whether there's any other questions here. So Susan's saying that she has some thyroid issues. Marsha, very dry skin. Yeah, Marsha, if you're on thyroid supplements because you've had your thyroid out, I often find that we're not well maintained on our level of medication. Still, that there can be some tweaking that can be helpful for that. And it may also be that just because we're being supplemented with something called T4, which is levothyroxine, lots of different names, but that's one of those thyroid hormones, we may still not be getting great conversion of that supplemented hormone through to the other hormones that our body needs for our cells to be doing all that we need to. So, really dry skin is a real giveaway that thyroid's still not doing everything that we want it to. It might be keeping some of the symptoms at bay, but not covering off everything. Any more questions? Let me just run through. Kathy's asked about a brand of electrolytes. Well, Kathy, I don't know where you are, but in the US, there's lots and lots of options. Some electrolytes are particularly geared towards sports people, and they will have sugar in them. They will have glucose in them. We don't want those. We do want to find one that's more geared to those that are eating in a low carb way. So Keto Chow do an electrolytes that are drops that you put in water. LMNT do a whole lot of flavored electrolytes. There's lots of brands. If you jump on something like iHerb, you can just put electrolytes in. It'll give you some options, and you really, like always, want to read other people's comments. I always read reviews on products just to kind of get an idea of what other people's thoughts are. I do find some electrolytes have a lot of artificial flavors, and so I tend to avoid those. The one that I use here, let me just grab, and again, normally I don't recommend products, but the one that I use, I'll just grab. I like this one. It's just a liquid that you just add into your water. It has no flavoring in it. And the reason for that is I just don't like adding a whole lot of artificial things to my diet. I'd rather just have it. And I do find that it just adds a little bit of a salty kind of taste to the water, but I find it really refreshing. So not saying that's the one and only, but that's, just consider what your health goals are, what you're trying to achieve. Some people find that they can just make up their own with some good quality sea salt, a little bit of lemon juice. If you've got some magnesium powder, add some of that as well. There's lots of ways to manage the electrolyte issue. It really just depends on what suits you best. Any other questions? Oh, Denise, someone will always ask this question when we talk about keto, and that's because we've become so concerned with our gallbladder about the fat in our diet, and validly so. If we don't have a gallbladder, no longer are we getting that burst of bile when we eat a higher fat meal. The bile sort of dripping out of the gallbladder all of the time. And so we do need to think about gallbladders. Some people come back to me and say, you know what, I've increased my fat intake and fine, I don't get any untoward symptoms from it. Other people have to be more careful about the fat in the diet. But this is where, with Lipedema Simplified and the way that we recommend keto, it doesn't have to be fat focused. You know, ketogenic diet is about lowering the carbohydrates. We then play around with what we swap out those carbohydrates for. So you may find you do more of a protein focused way of doing keto. You still do need some healthy fats. Everybody needs at least 30 grams of fat intake a day, just to keep cell membranes healthy, to keep our brain healthy. So we do need some fat, but you may not need, you know, like huge amounts. And it will be about playing around with the quantities in terms of what suits you specifically with those fats. There's no one size fits all for people who have had their gallbladder removed. Marsha's just saying she's using a pump. Awesome. Pumps can be really fantastic in terms of getting that fluid to move around in the body, which again lessens the amount of pain and discomfort that we're feeling. So wonderful. Well, I think it looks like we've come to the end of all the questions. If anyone else has anything that they wanted to ask or share, please feel free to sort of jump that into the comments. But can I just say thank you to everyone that's been on the call today? It's a wonderful opportunity for me to talk about keto. I'm really passionate about using food as medicine, and I find that especially for lipedema, that the way that we use that food as medicine, if we can focus on that ketogenic way of doing it, it provides a whole raft of benefits over and above some of the other eating regimes that you may see recommended, particularly in terms of swelling, in terms of pain, all of these sorts of things, that if we don't have the pain and it feels like we're becoming a little bit more mobile, it helps so many other things in terms of having that hope and sense of well-being in and of ourselves. So I would really encourage, wherever you are on this journey, whether you've, you know, at the beginning or whether you're along the journey, you've been testing out this for a while, just keep going. And, you know, we are a grassroots movement as a Lipedema Simplified and as a group of women with lipedema. You know, if somebody hadn't tested out keto initially for this, we you know, the research didn't come from that, you know, the groups that are studying the best diet for lipedema. This came from Leslyn and Catherine saying, let's try this out. Let's just see how we respond, and finding that it has some benefit. And we will continue to tweak this as we go along in terms of how to make this work as well as we can for the ladies with lipedema. So all of you, you know, report back, let us know. We love reading comments in the Facebook group about people's successes and what their findings working and what needs tweaking, because this is how we as a movement can get the most amount of benefit moving forward in terms of a ketogenic diet and in terms of dietary interventions to help support us with this condition. So thank you everyone for being part of the call today. Thank you for all that you do for the community. And I think that must be about it from me.